I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for everybody who loves stories about interesting people and events told by those who uncovered them from within their own family trees. This, we hope, will inspire you to discover and celebrate your history and your story. Holly Campbell gave birth to her son Jake in 2007. At just 2.5 months old, Jake suddenly stopped breathing and was rushed to the hospital. The following day, Holly and her husband were told the devastating news that their baby was not going to survive. In their grief, they wanted to give their son a legacy and help others, so the selfless decision to donate Jake's heart was made. During the same time period and nearly 1,000 miles away, Kim Scadlock gave birth to her son Beckham. Beckham seemed healthy at birth, but soon medical staff discovered he was struggling to breathe. After tests were done, Kim and her husband were told Beckham's only chance to survive was to receive a heart transplant. Thankfully, Jake's heart was a match for Beckham, and the transplant took place. Afterward, while both families were in the process of grieving and healing, they thought of each other often, although they didn't know each other's identity. Through the organ donor networks, the families were eventually able to contact each other. And in 2010, Holly, Kim, and their families met for the very first time at the Transplant Games in Wisconsin. 13 years later, in 2023, Holly and Kim were invited to perform the song For Good from the musical Wicked on the popular television show America's Got Talent. For Good has a special meaning for Holly, as it was the last song she was able to sing to Jake before he passed, and also special for Kim, as it was the first song she sang to Beckham after he received his new heart. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, Holly and Kim will share their story of love, friendship, and the importance of life-saving organ donation. I'd now like to welcome Holly Campbell and Kim Scadlock to our show. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Hello.
It's so good to have you both. So a couple of months back, Kelly and I were watching America's Got Talent, and we saw the two of you sing a duet. You sang together For Good from the play Wicked. First of all, your voices are beautiful, and beautiful song. You performed it so well. But I think what really blew us away was the story that you told to the judges that evening when you performed, and really why the two of you sang the song, how you had met. And it was that story that really warmed our hearts, and we felt it was such an important story to tell again to our listeners. Both of you graciously have agreed to speak with us on Your History, Your Story. So I'm going to start by asking Holly to tell us a little bit about your background and what are some of your interests and just your story.
So I am a teacher. I've been teaching for 17 years now, and my husband is also a teacher. We live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. And when we got married, we started a family. We had our son, Ben, who just turned 18, and our son, Alex, who turned 15. And in between, we had Jake, who we're going to talk about more in a little bit. I love to sing. I've loved to sing my whole life. My kindergarten teacher noticed that I had a knack for singing. She was one of those really amazing old school kindergarten teachers with a piano in her classroom, and kids sang all the time. And I wish that it could always be like that. And she said to my mom, I think Holly's a little different from most kids. And I actually, when I was in kindergarten, or maybe the next year in first grade, I can't remember. Obviously, it was a long time ago, but I sang It's a Small World After All when my brother graduated from nursery school, which was sort of the start of me performing, but I've never done anything professionally. I just do stuff for fun. I sing the national anthem frequently at sporting events at the high school where I teach. For a number of years, I did community theater. Haven't really been active in a while just because of schedules and stuff. And I direct the musical at our high school every year since 2016, which I really love doing. I love working with kids. So that's a lot of fun too.
My daughter was in the Wizard of Oz in her high school play. As a senior, she played Dorothy. And I saw what those directors had to go through to pull all that together. And you do that every year?
Yes, not alone. I work with a music director who does all the singing stuff, and I do more of the acting. And the two of us together work behind the scenes. My husband actually runs the sound and he builds a lot of the sets, and I help with that too. So we do a whole bunch of stuff together, and it's really, really enjoyable.
You go to Broadway shows and they're just fabulous. But when you go to high school productions and you see these kids just giving everything they have, and the quality of the plays that we've been to for high schools have been just incredible. And I got to hand it to the adults who pitch in and really make it work. So good work, Holly. That's really good.
Thank you.
Holly, tell us about the events in your life that really resulted in a permanent connection with Kim.
So in 2007, my husband and I welcomed our second child, Jacob. We had Ben. He was a year and 9 months old when Jake was born. And Jake was tiny but healthy. We felt like we were right where we needed to be. I had just been hired for my first full-time teaching job. I was going to start that fall teaching full-time, and had, a normal summer together for about 2.5 months. One night I left the house because I had an orientation at my new school for the kids. And so I went and I, left Ben and Andy and Jake, and Jake was sleeping when I left and Ben was sleeping. Everybody was napping. And while I was at this event, a sheriff's officer walked in, and he was looking for me. And at first, all I knew was that something had happened to my son, and I didn't know which one. I thought Ben had fallen or broken an arm or a leg or something. And I got driven to the hospital and called my husband on the way. And that's when he told me that Jake had stopped breathing in his bassinet, and they had to do CPR, and they managed to get him on life support and get his heart beating again. But he was completely dependent on life support at that point. He went from a local hospital. He was flown up to Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York, which is about a 2-hour drive from where we were living at the time. So my husband and I had to drive 2 hours. My dad lived closer, and he met us there at the hospital. And we got there. When we left the local hospital in Elmira, they'd said there might be hope. They had done a CAT scan there. And when we got to Rochester and they looked at the CAT scan, they said, we don't see any sign that your son will recover from this. And they said, we're going to repeat a scan tomorrow morning. This was like 11 midnight. It was really, really late at night. And we're going to repeat the scan tomorrow morning, and then we'll see from there. And the next morning, when they sat us down afterward, they said that they didn't believe there was any chance that Jake could recover from his injuries. He'd been without oxygen for too long. And we asked about organ donation.
I'm so sorry that happened. That must have been such a shock for you. And then to make that decision as a family to make that donation in those circumstances must have been very difficult for you.
It was hard, but at the same time, my husband and I were very scientifically minded, and we're not doctors, obviously, but we understand the concept of medicine enough that we knew and understood that Jake couldn't recover. And we thought, in the face of something so awful, what good could possibly come from it? And we felt if we could give Jake some kind of purpose and a way to have a legacy and something positive for us to hold on to. People always say it's so selfless, but at the time I felt I was being kind of selfish because I was doing it for me too, just to know that there would be some part of Jake still out there. And when we were first discussing everything, I had said, I want him to come off the life support so I can hold him one last time. And I didn't know that much about organ transplant. So I didn't understand, in order for a person to donate their heart, they have to be on life support right up until they're taken into surgery. They can't be without that. The heart has to continue beating right up until the last minute. And so they sat us down and they explained that. And they said, we could take him off of some of the supports if you wanted to donate his heart valves. But if you want to donate his heart, then we won't be able to do that. And they gave us some time to think about it. And they said, while you're thinking about it, we're going to look at the registry, the list, and find out if there is a need for a heart like Jake's. And a couple hours later, they came back and they told us that there was a 2-week-old boy in Iowa, which was just about as far as a heart could go. But there was a 2-week-old boy in Iowa that was a perfect match. And my husband and I, even though we were supposed to be talking about it and thinking about it, we hadn't been. We'd been talking and thinking about other things. And so we hadn't really come to a decision about what we would do if we were presented with that information. And we both just immediately said, okay. We knew when it was concrete like that, and we knew there was another family waiting in our shoes, but that they had this glimmer of hope through organ donation, we had to say yes.
It's very courageous.
Thank you.
I can't possibly put myself in your place during that time, but knowing that you wanted to help somebody else, but also to know that your son's heart is going to be helping somebody and still beating. It is beautiful and very courageous. Kim, I'm going to go to you right now. I'd like to hear a little of your story about some of where you came from, what some of your interests are, and then what brought you into connection with Holly.
My family, well, we've kind of lived everywhere. We just barely made a big old move from Oregon to New York, and we're living right outside the city. I was actually born in Canada, and I was raised there for a long time, and then I graduated high school in Utah, and then we moved to Iowa, and we have 4 children, me and my husband, and we had all of them in Iowa, and then we moved to Oregon, and now we're here. And my husband and I have been married for 20 years, and our children, our oldest is 17, then 16 and 12 and 10. And we're busy with those poor kids. They're busy kids. They're wonderful kids, and we feel so lucky to have them. And I stay at home with my children. I mean, I had worked for a long time. My degree was in business law, and I had worked for a long time. But then when I had our second child and he had health problems, I knew that my job was him and my children. And so I've stayed home ever since. I've had a few odd jobs. I taught gymnastics for the last 2 years, but I stay home mostly.
So tell us, you mentioned, first of all, you mentioned you lived in Iowa. So I'm making a connection with what Holly said about Iowa. And one of your sons was ill, and that is Beckham.
Yes, my
Yes.
second child.
Can you tell us about what led to your connection with Holly?
Absolutely. We were living in Des Moines at the time, and my oldest daughter, they're only 13 months apart, my first 2 children. it had taken a long time for us to be able to have her. And then 4 months after she was born, I found out I was pregnant, and we were like, what? It took us so long to have our first child. How did this happen? And we were thrilled. It was my easiest pregnancy. And Beckham was, we picked his name up. My husband is a huge soccer fan. And so David Beckham had just started in the United States when I was pregnant with him. And that name fits so well. And so we had picked out his name. And when he was born, he was a big baby. He was 2 weeks early, and he was almost 9 pounds. And, nothing in my ultrasounds or anything had said that he was sick in any way. It just had showed a healthy baby. And when he came out, he was blue, but they weren't overly concerned because babies are blue a lot when they come out. And they let me hold him. I remember noticing that he kind of did this weird thing where he kind of lifted his lip. And at the time, it didn't dawn on me that he was actually gasping for air. He couldn't breathe well. And so after I held him for a little bit, they put him in the bassinet next to me. And then my husband went to go get our 1-year-old daughter. And while he was gone, I remember a nurse was listening to him, and she was listening really close. Her head was right next to his chest. And she looked at me and she goes, I'm just going to take him out to show the doctor. And she tried not to alarm me. So I didn't think anything of it. And then I heard in the hallway a doctor yelling, did this mother have an ultrasound? Did this mother have an ultrasound? And then she came to my room and she goes, did you have an ultrasound? And I said, yeah, I had 2 of them. And she goes, well, what did it show? And I go, healthy baby boy. And she's like, well, your son has a heart murmur, and it's pretty apparent. And she's like, so I've called cardiology. And I still didn't think too much of it because our oldest child had had a heart murmur, but hers had gone away. And I called my husband, and he came back. And as he was walking in, the cardiologist came in, and he looked at both of us, and he just said, I have bad news. And he had drawn a picture of a heart. It was very simple drawing. And he goes, your son has something called mitral valve stenosis. And he's like, and his valves basically don't work. And he started spouting off all this medical stuff and saying, I'm going to take him over to the other hospital. I'm going to try a procedure. I don't think it will work. And I finally stopped him and I go, wait, stop. I go, are you saying my son's going to die? Because he had this look and he goes, it doesn't look good. And he just said, I don't think he will live through the night. And so we both, obviously lost it. We loved this child immediately. He was our sweet little miracle baby. And we sent him over to the other hospital that night, and they took a balloon and they pulled it through one of the valves in his heart, this procedure, and it's to kind of open up the valve. And they broke 3 balloons before they finally got one through. And then when they finally got it through, they saw that his heart or his valve not only was stiff, but that it was leaking. And on a scale of 1 to 4, his was 4, the worst. And at that point, they're like, we don't have any other options. He has to go to another hospital because he's above what we can do. And he had coded a few times where they had to bring him back to life. They had to bag him, and they did a life flight up to Iowa City to the children's hospital up there. And right after going, when we walked in, they were doing an ultrasound or a echocardiogram on his heart. And the cardiologist came in and he just said, tomorrow morning, we're going to have a meeting about Beckham and we'll let you know our decision. And they came in a little later, all these cardiologists, and they just said, the only thing that will save his life is a transplant. And they said, we've already listed him for a heart, and he's at the very top of the list because they do it in, they have stages. If you're on life support, you're on what's called 1A, and then you can go to 1B, and Beckham was listed at 1A. And Beckham, because his heart was it was 4 times the size of a normal heart. And so it had enlarged his rib cage in there. And because of that, they said he could receive a heart up to a 15-pound child. And then Beckham had a type A blood type. And because of that, they're like, he could get an A or an O heart. And because we lived in Iowa, because a heart can only be out of a body for 4 hours, we had more options because they could go side to side or up and down. But they still at the time only gave us about a 30% chance of him getting a heart, because it usually takes about 6 months, and Beckham didn't have 6 weeks. He was completely on life support, and all we could do was pray. And I remember talking to the doctor and being like, how do we hope for this? And I remember I wasn't naive to this, but I remember asking the doctor, where does the heart need to come from? And he just looked at me and he goes, it has to come from another baby. And it was heartbreaking, because here we are fighting for our child's life, and we know that another parent is going to have to lose a child because of that. And he looked at me because he could see my expression on my face, and he goes, we have no control over the fact that a child will pass away. He goes, we just ask that we can benefit from it. And that's all we could hope for. And Beckham waited for 10 days, which was unheard of. And they didn't tell us where the heart came from. They just said it had a long journey. And when he came out of surgery, he was pink for the first time in his life. He had been blue, and he was so swollen, and he looked beautiful. Like, as much as, he looked terrible because he had just gotten his chest cut open, he looked beautiful.
I don't know what to say. So I take it that Beckham just thrived from that point on, at least initially.
Yeah. So I remember the surgeon, the one who did the actual transplant, came in, and he sat down on the chair, and we'd just been through this ordeal, and they're over there trying to regulate his blood pressure. And he was so funny. He just sat down and kind of relaxed and goes, the heart started right up. He goes, it just wanted to beat. And he goes, we didn't have to shock it or anything. It just started right up. And I loved that. And my parents were there at the time helping us with our oldest child. And I remember my mom saying, I wonder where the heart came from. I wonder what kind of situation, because you never know what type of situation it is. And I got this overwhelming feeling that this heart was loved. It came from a loving home. Like, I knew for a fact, and I turned to my mom and I go, this is a loved heart. This was a loved child. And I just knew that. And we've definitely had many, many ups and downs with Beckham, but it's never been his heart. It's been, because of being immune compromised or so forth. But his heart has never suffered.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Holly, I want to ask you, after that decision was made, and that Jake's heart went to somebody, tell us about the days, weeks, months afterward, and what it was like for you. And when did you start to get curious? When did you feel moved to learn more about where Jake's heart went?
So when we said goodbye to Jake, kind of almost immediately we started wondering, we found out on a Tuesday that there was a match. It was August 14th, and we had to wait until Thursday to the 16th before he could actually be able to go and to give the gift of life. And so we spent some time, kind of saying goodbye and making plans and all of that. And I sang to him all the time. So I sang to him a lot in the hospital. He was such a fussy baby. He was kind of colicky, and that soothed him. And so I sang to him a lot. And then when we were saying goodbye the morning that he went off to surgery, they got a pillow and they were able to set him kind of on my lap and Andy's lap. We sat next to each other and they kind of just put a pillow across our laps. And even though Jake was all hooked up to life support, they were able to set him there so that we could kind of hold him. And I sang For Good from the musical Wicked to him because it just fit. And the line, you'll be with me like a handprint on my heart, really seemed to suit the situation. And I knew he may not have been with us for long, but he'd had a really strong impact on our lives and a lot of other people's lives, our families and our friends. And we went home without him with our older son, Ben, on the 16th of August, which was a week before Ben's second birthday. And we started trying to find our new normal. And through that, we were constantly thinking about Jake's heart and his heart recipient and wondering about the baby boy that got Jake's heart and his family and all of that. And in October, we got a letter from the organ procurement organization we worked with, Finger Lakes Donor Recovery Network. And all it said was that the transplant was at least initially successful and already included information we already knew, like that it was a 2-week-old boy in Iowa. And obviously we knew what date the transplant took place. And so several months later, my husband, who was having an especially hard day, got on the internet and he just plugged in 2-week-old boy, Iowa, heart transplant, August 16th, 2007. And he called me because I was still at work, and said, I think I'm looking at a picture of Jake's heart recipient, because he found a news article, and the news article led to a blog that Beckham's family was keeping, so that they could keep all their relatives that didn't live locally updated on everything. And so we thought, there's no way, right? There's no way there was another 2-week-old boy in Iowa that received a heart transplant on that date. That would just be too wild. So we just kind of watched the blog because we thought about it. I've said to Kim numerous times that I thought probably every day I wrote a letter in my head, and I just wasn't ready to actually put pen to paper or type it or whatever. And sometime in the summer, late summer, I saw a post go up from Kim saying that she'd written a letter to the donor family. And so we knew we knew all the stuff about Beckham, and we knew that we were going to get a letter from them. And because of HIPAA and privacy laws and all that, there's all these rules about how you go about contacting your recipient family or your recipient or your donor family. And you're supposed to write these very anonymous letters. You can't give names or like where you're from or your contact information or anything like that. So, of course, Kim and her family had done that the right way, and they had written this fairly anonymous letter, but so heartfelt. Like, it was just what me and Andy, as Jake's parents, what we needed to hear, to know how loved this little boy was, and by extension how loved Jake was. And when we got the letter, which took a while because it had to go, Kim wrote it and then she gave it to her organ procurement organization, and then it went to ours, and then it came to us. When we got it, I got a hold of my contact and I said, can I just sign a release, and can we just tell them everything? Can we just write back and include our names and our contact information and all that? And they said, yep, here's the form. And we signed a release, and we wrote back, and we heard back from them in early November of 2008.
Oh my goodness. It's like you just sliced right through the red tape in one shot, huh?
Yeah, it broke a couple rules, but no,
broke a couple.
Not really. It felt like it sometimes. And it's funny because Andy and I would say to each other, what if they think we're like creepy, that we've been just stalking them on the internet, and that they're going to think these people are weirdos? thankfully they didn't think that.
Not at all. Kim, what did you think when you made this contact with Holly?
So we always knew we wanted to be in contact with them. My husband actually, ironically enough, so my husband's aunt, his dad's sister, had a heart transplant when Nate, my husband, was very little. And so my husband had grown up around a heart transplant recipient. And my husband had gone to the Transplant Games starting when he was 10 or something. And when I met him, he was actually working at a transplant. It was almost like a Ronald McDonald House where transplant recipients live while they're waiting to receive their organ donation. And so for us, organ donation was always something special to us, something, near and dear to our heart. And so I knew I always wanted to meet the donor family. And just like Holly said, I wrote the letter a billion times in my head, over and over. But it always stopped me where I'd be like, what if I write them and it's too hard for them? I know they're suffering. And for me, I think a lot of people don't realize, how hard it is for the recipient's family, because you feel this guilt over that your child is alive and there isn't. And I would wake up at night to go feed Beckham in the middle of the night, as a newborn, and I would be holding him, feeding him, and I would just start sobbing because I would think there's another mom somewhere in the country whose arms are empty. And I didn't want to feel guilty because I was so grateful for this gift, but I was heartsick because I ached for this family. And so I wanted to get in contact with them, just sometimes like selfishly for me, so I could be able to know that they were okay and that they didn't hate us. I know that sounds funny, but I wanted that connection.
I understand when you mentioned about feeling guilty that might be something you would feel, like how come, I feel like we're so blessed and there's another family hurting. So that makes total sense from a human standpoint for sure. Holly, let me go back to you for a minute. Tell us about after the contact was made and now you're able to talk to each other and communicate, but it didn't just stop at, oh, that's nice, we wrote a letter, we know that we're both okay, and there's just a lot of love between you because of the sacrifices made and the love that was behind it and everything. But how did your relationship grow? When did you actually meet each other, and where was that?
So we started corresponding both by email and text, and kind of through Facebook and that sort of thing. Right away, as soon as they got our letter, we heard back from them pretty much as soon as they opened it, from what Kim has said. And we kept in touch and we would update each other on things. Just about a year after Beckham's transplant, my younger son Alex was born. So we had a lot of exciting things going on in our lives too. And when Beckham was going to be 2, that spring before he turned 2, we started talking about the Transplant Games of America because I had heard about them not long after we lost Jake. There was another donor mom who runs an organization out of the Syracuse, New York area, which is part of our region for our OPO. And she said, you would love this event. It's so great. Like even before we found out who Beckham and his family were, this was something we really wanted to do. And so I said to Kim, is there any chance you guys could consider going to the games this summer? Because they were in Madison, Wisconsin, which from Iowa was not exactly convenient, but not super far either. And for us, it was a flight away. So it wasn't a terribly long flight or arduous or anything. So we talked about it for a while and they were still kind of up in the air, but we knew we were going to go one way or another. We really wanted that experience. One of the things that they do at every Transplant Games during the opening ceremonies, all of the teams from all the different regions walk in. And then once all the teams are in, and the teams are made up of recipients of all ages, from really little, like 1.5, 2 years old, all the way up into their 80s. And they compete in different athletic events. And after they've all processed into whatever space is being used for the event, the donor families come in, and all the recipients and the teams and the support people that are there give a standing ovation to the donor families. And I was like, that just sounds amazing. I just want to experience that, if nothing else. So I had heard somewhere there had been a posting, probably on a website, that they were looking for performers for the Transplant Games. And I thought, For Good would be the perfect song for this kind of event. And so I got together with a friend of mine and recorded myself singing it. And he did like a little collage of pictures of Jake and stuff. And I submitted it. And when I found out that they wanted me to sing at the opening ceremonies, I let Kim know, I've got some really cool news. I'd like to share it with you over the phone. So that was the first time we talked on the phone. And I called her up and I told her the story about how it was the last song I sang to Jake, and that I was going to be performing it at the Transplant Games, partially hoping just to convince them that they really had to come, because I was going to do this thing and it was a really big deal to me, and I would love them to be there for it. And then Kim told me that was the song she sang to Beckham when he came out of surgery after he got Jake's heart.
My gosh, Kim, when you heard that from Holly, what did you think? How did that hit you?
So Beckham, I guess I should back up. I had always loved that song, For Good. When I was actually pregnant with him, I went to the musical Wicked for the first time, and I've always loved to sing, and I couldn't hold Beckham for so long after he was born because he had a billion tubes connected to him. And so right after his surgery, I went over, and they had just gotten him stabilized, and I was rubbing his head, and the first thing I did was sing the song For Good. And it was just something natural to me because I love that song so much. And so when Holly told us she was going to sing at the opening ceremonies, Beckham had quite a rough almost year with battling health problems, pretty severe. And we didn't know if we could go because he had been so sick. And when we heard she was singing, we were like, well, we have to go. There's no way we can't go. And Holly had texted me and she was like, do you think we could talk on the phone? And we had never talked to each other. And so I remember picking up the phone and I heard her say, hi, Kim, this is Holly. And the first thing I did was grab Beckham. And I go, Beckham, this is your donor family, because we had talked about them so much. And Beckham, I go, say hi. And he goes, hi. And he spoke to them, and it was the sweetest thing. And he had said, hi, Holly. He was quite 2, and he was almost 3. That's what it was. And so it was so sweet. But so we had that sweet, beautiful moment, where he had got to talk to him. And then when she said, well, I'm singing the song For Good from Wicked, it was the last song I sang to Jake. And at first it didn't register. And I was like, wait, what? I go, this is crazy. But that was the first song I sang to Beckham after he got his transplant. And it was a neat story, but it didn't really hit us during the conversation. And it wasn't till later that night I was talking to Nate and I was like, oh my gosh, do you realize how crazy this is? That it was the last song that Heart heard in Jake and the first one it heard in Beckham. And I'm like, what are the odds of that?
That is incredible. Now, Holly, why don't you tell us, what was it like for you meeting Kim and Beckham for the first time?
So my family went out to Madison for the Transplant Games, and I had a rehearsal that afternoon because they wanted me to perform the song with a live band, which I had not done very much at all. That kind of thing. Like I don't know, I've been in musicals, but it's different than performing with a band. And I never got all the way through it in a rehearsal. I broke down crying. I couldn't finish the song. And I was like, you know what? It's going to be what it is. I'm going to do the best I can. This is fine. And then we went over to meet Beckham and his family, and a news organization had gotten a hold of the information, or maybe it was the team that Beckham and his family are affiliated with. I can't even remember at this point, but they arranged to have a photographer there and a news crew there to film it. And so we walk into, it was like we had to walk down this hallway to like a conference room, and it was all glass in the conference room. So as we're approaching the room, we can see them milling around in the room. And we walked in, and I took a few steps in, and we knew who Beckham was. Obviously, we'd seen pictures and stuff, so it was very clear. And I knelt down and opened my arms, and I said, "Hi, Beckham." And Kim kind of gave him like the smallest of nudges, and that's all it took. And he came right over and he gave me a hug. And I don't think I will ever have the vocabulary to describe what it is like to be a mother who has lost her child, but gets to hug the child who's carrying her son's heart. It was completely amazing. It was just definitely one of the best moments of my life.
Oh boy, Kim, what was it like for you?
So what I love is the photographer captured every little moment of that. And I was actually pregnant with our third child at the time. And so I was trying to kneel down with my pregnant belly. And I had talked to Beckham before because he was very wary of people because he had been in the hospital basically that whole year, in and out with pretty severe health problems. And every adult he met wanted to poke him and prod him and, you know, do doctor checks on him. And so he was wary of adults. And we had talked to him about his donor family, and we had shown him pictures over and over again. And we had said, you know, we got him, you know, really excited. And so when they were walking in, I mean, of course, me and my husband were bawling. And I knelt down with my pregnant belly and I go, Beckham, that's Holly. And Beckham, it was so cute. He just kind of went into her arms, and they have a picture of Holly holding him. And she has this look, just a pure joy. But then one of my favorites is they captured a picture where I was kneeling down, and you can see the joy on my face as he's walking from one mom to the other. And it's one of my favorite pictures they have of that, because as much as like Holly's like, you can't imagine, you know, what it's like for her, it was the same for me, because I had ached for this family for so long. And the fact that they loved Beckham meant more than I could even say. I that they, not just that they wanted to meet him, but that they truly loved him. It was one of the sweetest moments and indescribable. You know, it was perfect.
Funny, when you said indescribable, that was the word that was in my head. That how could you even describe that feeling? So intense closeness with another family. Holly, you had to go through with singing that song though at the
So
at the
this is
games, right?
this is a funny story. I knew they were going to show the video that I had submitted that had like the slideshow of pictures and stuff. And I said, and they were going to kind of tell our story before I went on to perform. And I said to the, you know, the handlers or whatever, I said, is there any way you can like hide me in a closet before I have to walk out there so I don't have to hear all that? Because if I listen to it and I'm thinking about it, I had to like disassociate is what I anticipated.
Right.
Because, you know, I didn't make it through the rehearsals. So I did that. I literally stood in a janitor's closet until the last possible minute. And then somebody opened the door and I crossed a hallway and entered the backstage area and went onto the stage and I sang the song. And I walked out onto that stage, and it was at that time, the biggest audience I'd ever performed in front of. And my family and Kim and her family were right in the front, like really close to where I could see them. And I was like, I'm never going to get through this. And in the intro, I just took this deep breath and I felt the most amazing sense of calm come over me in that moment. It was like indescribable. Again, like that's the word for it. I just felt completely at peace, and I was able to sing that song, and I got all the way through it, and I didn't break down in tears until the end. And then like there's these pictures of me performing it with like my hand over my face at the end because I was just overwhelmed. And it was so nice. Like singing has always been cathartic for me. I've sang to soothe my children, and I've sang when my heart is hurting. And so to share that, it was my first time being immersed in the transplant community and taking part in an event like this one. And to have that opportunity to be able to share something with people who were on either side of this experience and their family members and loved ones, it was such an honor for me to be able to do that. And it really, really meant the world to me.
That's beautiful. And thank you both for sharing that indescribable moment, but you described it very well, actually. I know my heart's warmed from it. And I think those games are wonderful. You know, bringing donors and recipients and their families together is just a terrific thing. We did an episode, actually, I think it's almost a couple of years ago now, about organ transplant, organ donation. We believe on this podcast, it's a very, very important message to get out. And I want to thank you both for that. But let's go back to what I started this podcast with, that Kelly and I, my wife Kelly and I, saw the two of you singing on America's Got Talent. What brought you from that conversation you had about, oh my goodness, I used to sing that to Beckham, and Holly, you sang it to Jake, and you had that aha moment, which must have been crazy. But what brought you to the stage of America's Got Talent? Let me go to Kim. Can you tell us what happened?
I think we never realized the reaction that people would have when we told them about this moment. And every time we told people, they would just be like, wait, what? And because we thought it was just something, that we reacted to. And so I had this idea for a long time about singing that song together. And so I asked Holly about that because my donor network wanted to have the Campbells come out and speak. And we didn't have the opportunity to practice because we're so far apart from each other. And so we, the first time we performed it, that was the first time we practiced it. And then the Rochester OPO wanted us to do the same thing for them. And so they had Nate and I and Beckham and my oldest daughter come out to Rochester, and we sang it there again. And they had I don't know if you would call it like a film kind of production company, record us telling our story. And then they put pictures of us and video footage of us singing that together. And they put it on the internet. And it was a beautifully done, almost kind of documentary kind of thing that they put on YouTube. And many people saw it, and we got such beautiful comments. And anyway, we this year I got an email from someone from America's Got Talent. I'm not going to lie, I deleted it because I thought it was spam. And so I didn't even try to listen. And Holly had gotten the same email, and she had texted me that night, and she goes, did you see this? And I was like, oh yeah, I deleted it because I didn't even read it. And she goes, you didn't read it? And she's like, oh my gosh. And she like copied it and sent it to me. And I read it, and it was from a producer from America's Got Talent. And she's like, we saw your performance and it was beautiful. And we want you to come sing it and perform it for America's Got Talent. And my first reaction was no. I was like, I can't perform in front of 7,000 people. And it was such a beautiful thing and I could see how much it would mean to Holly too. And I can't even say we would do anything for the Campbells. We can never, ever, ever say thank you enough for our sweet Beckham. And so for me, I was like, we would absolutely do anything for them.
You've never performed in front of people, Kim, like really before this opportunity came up, right?
So I have always loved to sing, and I sang in choir in high school, and I sang, for church, and I did some solos here and there, but I never was a performer. I like to call myself like a shower singer, where I love to belt in the shower. And I was so nervous to sing with Holly, who's so experienced, and she sounds so calm when she sings. And I'm someone who is shaky, and and so I get shaky when I get nervous, and so I was intimidated to sing with her. But like Holly said, how she was so calm during that performance at the Transplant Games. I think us singing together, somehow we calm each other, and we make it through. And I think it's because we know how much this song means to us.
Well, you looked calm to us watching you perform, but I'm sure that you were probably having butterflies in your stomach at the time. But let me ask you, Holly, what was the whole experience for you like? I mean, you've had experience performing, but still, this was an incredibly emotional moment with your friend. Kim, what was it like to know that you were going to do this, and what was it like performing?
So in the weeks, and it was like 2 months time, less than 2 months from when we were asked and then went out to do the recording. It was a lot of nerves. I can remember texting back and forth with Kim about, oh my gosh, all the butterflies we were feeling, and what are we going to wear, and what if this happens, and what are we going to do about this, and then we were going to be flying out to LA to go to Pasadena on the 31st of March to perform on April 2nd. And on March 20th, I got COVID.
Oh.
I managed to go 3 years. I had never gotten it. And at the most like high stakes moment, that's when I get sick. But thankfully it was like just enough time to recover and still be able to go and meet all the requirements I needed to, health wise. But unfortunately, just, I got feeling pretty decent recovering. And then I got a sinus infection. And I tell everybody about this because it was so incredibly stressful for me. Like this was a stressful thing anyway. And now to know that my voice is not where I want it to be, and like, once in a lifetime chance to perform eventually in front of millions of people on television, and here I am not feeling my best. And so I spent that whole day before we recorded like chugging honey, taking throat lozenges, drinking water, telling Kim I don't know how I'm going to do this. Kim mentioned we never got to rehearse when we did this before, and we had very little time to rehearse this time, but we did get a little bit, like we got maybe a half hour, 45-minute long coaching session with a vocal coach the day before. And I'm expressing my terror about like, what if I go out and I open my mouth and what I think should come out doesn't come out? And she kept saying to us, this is about your story. It's about the story. Don't worry about the song, worry about the story, which was easier said than done for me. But that's what I kept telling myself. And so just before we went on, this vocal coach, her name was Bridget, she was amazing, finds us backstage and says, just remember, it's about the story. And both Kim and I were very soothed by that. There was like such a really helpful, inspiring kind of moment to just be reminded of that before we walked out on stage. And when we actually walked out on stage, I was more nervous about answering the judges' questions because you don't know what they're going to ask you. they don't know anything about the acts. That was always one thing I was like, sure they know. They get like a prompt sheet or something. They really don't know anything about the acts before they come out on stage. And so I walk out there and Kim and I don't know what they're going to ask us. And I was really anxious about answering the questions and worried about like stumbling or just sounding like an idiot. And, through the magic of editing, I didn't sound like an idiot when it aired at all. But once we got through that and we started singing, again, I just felt really kind of at peace, and we had each other there, and we had like a plan for when we were going to grab each other's hands, and Kim reached for my hand earlier. And that was really soothing too, to just stand there. And, looking back on it, I feel like it wasn't as scary once we started singing as I thought it would be. And I kind of got lost in the moment and really enjoyed it, and did our best and had some lovely feedback from the judges. But I think the thing that meant the most to us is the whole audience really appreciated our story and our performance. And it was just so gratifying to know that it resonated with people. And we ultimately, the reason we knew we wanted to go was because we wanted to promote organ donation. We wanted to have an opportunity to say, this is such an important cause, and it's a wonderful cause. And when you leave this earth, you could potentially save lives. You can save up to, it's either 7 or 8 lives, and enhance dozens upon dozens through tissue donation. So it was really important to us that we could take an opportunity to do that. And afterwards, when it aired, we started getting people reaching out and saying, because of this, I have become an organ donor. And that's all we could ask for.
First of all, watching the two of you and listening to the two of you, you didn't look nervous, but I knew you had to be. I mean, I don't know who wouldn't be, because of how personal the story was, and trying to hold it together must have been very difficult. So, Holly, let me ask you, your friendship, the story behind how you met, the circumstances, how you came together and then performed this incredible song together. What do you want the legacy of your friendship with Kim to be?
I think, for us personally, I hope that we always have the connection that we have. And I can't imagine we wouldn't. And that our families do. When Beckham and Ben and Alex, my boys, were younger, when they were littler, as soon as they would get together, it was like they hadn't ever been apart. And Beckham started calling Ben and Alex his heart brothers. And I think that's a legacy that I hope lives on forever. They're teenagers now, so they don't talk that way so much anymore, but they still love and appreciate each other. And my boys don't talk as much about organ donation, but I know that it means a lot to them. And if Kim and I, through this appearance on AGT and whatever other advocacy we can do, can make an impact on people who previously hadn't considered or even wouldn't consider organ donation, that would really mean a lot to us. New York State, where we now both live, ranks at the very bottom. I don't think it's in the very last position, but it's way down at the bottom in terms of percentage of eligible people registered to be an organ donor. And the numbers are actually their worst in downstate New York. So in the New York City metro area and downstate. And I actually just got an email today from the community outreach person at Donate Life New York State. And that abysmal was the word that he used to describe the registration rates down there. And now with Kim and I both living nearby, I think, at least short term, we would love to be able to make an impact on this region. Obviously, if it goes bigger, great. But at the very least, like where we live, if we can get more people to think about organ donation and at least consider it, that would be really remarkable. when I think about Jake's legacy, I think Jake's legacy more than anything is Beckham. And just knowing that he's here and that he's had these 16 years with his family and learning and finding, his niche in life and all the things that he loves to do. That's a gift that if anyone thinks that that's important, I hope that they'll consider registering to be an organ donor.
I was going to ask you if you have any final words for our listeners about the importance of organ donation, but you just nailed it right there. And the fact is, you're both on the East Coast now, and I'm in New Jersey, so we're pretty close neighbors. And when you mentioned about the abysmal numbers as far as organ donation, thank God for really the message that you're giving. And I hope this podcast and other media will really further this story of the importance of organ donation, because lives are saved. Lives are saved, and it's so important. Kim, let me go to you now. What do you want the legacy of your friendship with Holly to be?
Well, my husband and I, we like to say that Holly and Andy are people we would have never, ever met in our whole lives. And the fact that we have this connection, they are so special to us. And what we've gained hasn't just been, a life saved, but we've gained another family, and they are like our other family. And through each other, we've healed each other from so much heartache that we both went through. And I love that we can make a difference. I love that we've received messages from people who watched our segment on AGT, and they said, I had the conversation, I don't know why I was never registered to be an organ donor, because look what it can do. And I love that it changes people and makes them think, oh, this does save lives, because organ donation is something you never think about until you are faced with it. I hope that people see the love between our families, because we truly love them so much.
Well, I can feel that, and I can hear that in both of your voices. And we were fortunate enough to be able, Kelly and I, to speak with the two of you a few weeks ago, and we just sensed it. And the thing is that you're both united, both your families are united in promoting an extremely important cause. I wanted to just real quick ask you, Kim, how is Beckham doing today?
Oh, he's doing great. So Beckham is 16. He is in high school. He loves to read. He loves to watch Mythbusters and do science experiments. And he's such a happy kid. The other day we were all saying things we were thankful for, and Beckham, without a hesitation, goes, I'm thankful for my heart, and I'm so thankful that I'm alive because of Jake. And he knows he's special, but he knows he's a normal kid too. I couldn't ask for anything more. He's a normal kid. He lives his life like there's no difference in him, and I love that. It's given him a normal life, and we couldn't have asked for anything more.
Well, what I'm gathering here is that you're both very normal people with a very extraordinary story. And it's a story that has to be told. As hard as it is, I'm sure, I can see from both of your faces how much this takes out of you to tell this story. But I know you both know how important this is. Holly, let me ask you, if people want to learn more about organ donation, what can they do?
Well, anyone with internet access in the US can go to donatelife.net, and that will direct you to your own state's organ donor registry. And I mean, I don't know every single state in the US, but I'm pretty sure you can register online through most of them. And I believe most of the time you can go to your DMV. I know here in New York State, our DMV works really hard advocating for organ donation. And whenever you go into the DMV, even when you register a vehicle now, they have that question, and it's as simple as checking a box.
So I urge everybody listening to do that. Thank you both, Holly and Kim, for just being vulnerable and telling your story to our listeners. And I hope that many people get this message and that your friendship just continues to blossom, because it is so evident that there's so many good things coming out of your friendship. I wish you the very best blessings on both of your families going forward. Tell Beckham I said hi. And I want to thank your husbands as well for supporting this. I know that they've been through all this with you, and just thank them for all that they've done as well. So thank you. And I hope you really have a wonderful fall season and a holiday season as well. And I'll look forward to catching up with both of you in the near future and see what other good things you're up to.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your History, Your Story. You can connect with us on Facebook and YouTube at Your History, Your Story, or on Instagram and Twitter at YHYS Podcast. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, or a story to tell. Be well and God bless.